They say love makes a family, but nobody warns you that greed can destroy one in a single heartbeat. For 8 beautiful years, I believed I had found my forever home. As a retired community center program director, I'd spent my career fostering healthy family environments, helping broken families heal and grow stronger. When I married Arthur, a gentle widower, I opened my heart completely to his 11-year-old daughter, Emma. She became the daughter I'd never had, and I poured everything into her upbringing. Endless emotional stability, countless hours of patient care, over $30,000 of my personal savings for her activities, her education, her dreams. I created what I thought was a loving, stable home, believing with every fiber of my being in our beautiful blended family. Then Arthur suddenly passed, and my world shattered in ways I never imagined possible. Less than 24 hours after we buried the man I loved, Emma, now 19, stood in our living room holding his old will like a weapon. "You're just an outsider, Linda," she hissed, her voice cold as winter steel. "Get out of my house." Within hours, she'd changed every lock begun, selling my cherished belongings, erasing 8 years of my life as if I'd never existed. "You have no humanity," her Aunt Brenda sneered from the doorway, watching my world collapse with satisfaction. But what Emma, Brenda, and their lawyer didn't know was my secret arsenal. 8 years of meticulous personal journals documenting every sacrifice, every moment of love. Arthur's own recorded voice, captured just months before his death, expressing his regret about that outdated will and explicitly telling Emma to take care of Linda always. My elder law attorney was waiting. This time, their heartless cruelty wouldn't just unravel, it would expose their shocking lack of humanity and prove that truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to triumph over betrayal. The morning after Arthur's funeral, I woke up in what I still thought of as our bedroom, surrounded by 8 years of shared memories. The grief was overwhelming, but I knew I needed to have a conversation with Emma about practical matters. Our future, the house we'd called home, the family we'd built together. I found her in the kitchen, no longer the sweet girl who used to help me bake cookies, but a cold stranger holding a manila folder like a shield. "Emma, sweetheart," I began gently. "I know this is an incredibly difficult time, but we need to talk about what happens next. About the house, about us, about keeping your father's memory alive together." She looked up at me with eyes that held no warmth, no recognition of the woman who'd tucked her in every night for years, who'd held her through nightmares, who'd cheered at every school play and graduation ceremony. "There is no us, Linda," she said, her voice sharp and final, "and there's no next for you here." Before I could respond, she slid the folder across the kitchen island toward me. Inside was Arthur's will dated 12 years ago, 2 years before we'd even met. In black and white, it named Emma as his sole heir. "You're just a glorified babysitter," Emma continued, her face hardening with each word. "Dad married you because he was lonely, not because he loved you. You have no rights here, no claim to anything. You're losing your mind if you think you belong in my house. Get out, you gold-digging outsider. You have no humanity." The words hit me like physical blows. This was the child I'd raised, the young woman I'd helped shape into someone I thought was kind and compassionate. But the person standing before me was someone I didn't recognize. "Emma," I said, my voice shaking, "I don't understand. This is our home. We're family. I know you're grieving, but we were never family." She cut me off. "You were just convenient. Someone to cook and clean and pay for things while Dad worked." That's when I heard Brenda's voice from the doorway. Emma's maternal aunt had let herself in with the spare key, and the satisfied smile on her face told me she'd been orchestrating this moment. Honestly, Linda, Brenda said, settling into a chair like she owned the place. Didn't you expect this Arthur finally saw through you? You always were just after his money. You're nothing. We'll make sure you get nothing from this $700,000 estate. I felt my world, tilting everything I'd believed about my life, suddenly called into question. That's not true, I whispered. I loved Arthur. I love Emma. I've spent 8 years of my life, over $30,000 of my own money, raising her, caring for both of them. Emma laughed a sound so cruel it made my heart physically ache. $30,000. That's nothing compared to what you'll lose now. This house, everything in it, it's all mine. I tried one more time to reach the Emma I'd known and loved. Emma, please. I raised you from the time you were 11 years old. I was there for every scraped knee, every broken heart, every important moment of your life. I loved your father with everything I had. This was our home, our family. How can you erase 8 years of memories of love like they never happened? For just a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the old Emma in her eyes. But Brenda spoke up again, her voice dripping with disdain. Love, is that what you call isolating a grieving widower from his family, manipulating a vulnerable man into marriage? Face it, Linda, you're a predator who targeted a lonely father, and now that he's gone, your little game is over. Before I could defend myself, there was a knock at the door. Emma opened it to reveal a stern-looking man in an expensive suit carrying a briefcase. Mr. Davies, Emma said, suddenly sounding very young and uncertain. Thank you for coming so quickly. Mr. Davies, Emma's lawyer, stepped into what had been my living room and looked at me like I was an intruder. Mrs. Linda Morrison, he said formally, I'm here to serve you with an immediate eviction notice. You have 24 hours to remove your personal belongings from these premises. Any attempt to re-enter the property after that time will be met with legal action for trespassing. I stared at the papers he thrust into my hands, the legal language blurring through my tears. This can't be legal, I said. I've lived here for 8 years. This is my home. Not according to Mr. Arthur Morrison's last will and testament, Mr. Davies replied coldly. My client Emma Morrison is the sole heir to this property and all assets therein. Furthermore, any attempt to contest this will shall result in additional legal fees, which currently exceed $10,000, becoming your responsibility. As if the eviction wasn't devastating enough, Emma immediately called a locksmith. I watched through the window as he began changing every lock on the house where I'd been a wife and mother for 8 years. But the cruelest blow was yet to come. Over the next few hours, as I tried to process what was happening, I watched Emma and Brenda walk through my home, pointing at my belongings, my furniture, my art, even my most precious mementos of Arthur. This can all go, Emma said dismissively about a rocking chair I'd bought for her when she was 12, where we'd spent countless evenings reading together. And this ugly painting, definitely get rid of it. The ugly painting was a piece Arthur and I had chosen together on our honeymoon, a small landscape that reminded us of the cabin where we'd spent our wedding night. By evening, they'd arranged for an estate sale company to come the next day. My life, my memories, my 8 years of love and sacrifice would be sold to strangers for cash. That night, with nowhere else to go, I called my former colleague Margaret, who'd worked with me at the community center. Linda, my God, what's happened? She asked when she heard my voice. As I explained the situation, staying on Margaret's couch with nothing but the clothes I'd worn to my husband's funeral, I felt something shifting inside me. The devastating shock was hardening into something else, something colder and more determined. Emma thought she could erase me, rewrite our family history, pretend that 8 years of love and sacrifice had never happened. Brenda was already spreading poison about me throughout the community, painting me as a gold digger who'd finally been exposed. But they'd made one crucial mistake. In their rush to destroy me, they'd forgotten that I'd spent my entire career documenting family dynamics, protecting vulnerable people, and building cases against those who abused their power. I wasn't just a heartbroken widow. I was a professional who knew how to gather evidence, who understood the system, and who had learned never to underestimate the power of truth. They wanted a fight. They were about to discover they'd picked the wrong woman to betray. The next morning brought fresh humiliation. Emma and Brenda had moved quickly to establish their narrative posting on social media about their newfound peace after removing toxic influences from their lives. The photos showed them smiling in what used to be my kitchen with captions about healing and moving forward from negative people. I stared at those posts from Margaret's couch, feeling physically sick. 8 years of my life reduced to a toxic influence that needed to be removed. Every Christmas morning, every birthday celebration, every quiet evening when Arthur and I had worked together to help Emma with homework or comfort her through teenage heartbreak, all erased as if it had been poisonous rather than loving. But Emma wasn't content to simply erase me from her own life. She'd begun a systematic campaign to destroy my reputation in the community where I'd worked and lived for decades. I received a call from Patricia, another former colleague, her voice heavy with concern. "Linda, I don't know how to say this, but Emma Morrison called me yesterday. She said some very troubling things about your behavior during your marriage to her father. She seemed to be implying that you'd been inappropriate or unprofessional in your past work with families." My blood ran cold. What exactly did she say? She was very careful with her words, but the implication was that you'd been well greedy, that you'd pushed yourself into situations where you didn't belong, taken advantage of vulnerable people. "Linda, I've known you for 15 years. I don't believe a word of it, but she sounded very convincing, very concerned about protecting other families from what she called your pattern of behavior." Emma was systematically contacting everyone in my professional network, planting seeds of doubt about my character and competence. She was trying to ensure that even if I survived this financial devastation, I'd have no professional reputation left to rebuild my life upon. That evening, as I sat in Margaret's small apartment, trying to figure out my next move, I heard Emma's voice through the thin walls of the duplex next door. She was on the phone with Brenda, and they were laughing. "The old hag thinks she'll keep the house," Emma said, her voice filled with gleeful malice. "We'll make sure she's penniless. Arthur's debts are her problem now, not mine." I pressed my ear to the wall, horrified by the casual cruelty in her voice. "She actually thought she was family." Brenda's voice came through the speakerphone. "Can you imagine some random woman thinking she could waltz in and claim what rightfully belongs to blood relatives? The best part," Emma continued, "is that she'll never be able to prove Dad really loved her. All she has are her delusions and whatever lies she tells herself to sleep at night." The chilling clarity of that overheard conversation hit me like ice water. This wasn't about grief or confusion or even simple greed. This was about deliberate, calculated cruelty. Emma and Brenda had planned this campaign to destroy me, probably from the moment Arthur's condition became serious. But as devastating as that realization was, it also awakened something in me. A memory I'd buried so deeply, I'd almost forgotten it existed. The secret I'd kept for Arthur, the sacrifice that had defined our early marriage and shaped everything that came after. It was 3 years into our marriage when Arthur broke down and confessed to me about his past. Before we'd met, before his first wife's death, He'd made a terrible mistake. In his desperation to provide for his young family, he'd embezzled over $100,000 from his employer, a small nonprofit where he'd managed the finances. He'd been caught fired and was facing criminal charges that would have meant prison time and the complete destruction of his reputation. His first wife had been battling severe depression, and the stress of the scandal had pushed her toward the mental breakdown that ultimately led to her death. When Arthur told me this, he was sobbing like a broken man. "Linda, I can't go to prison. Emma would lose everything. She'd end up in foster care, and after losing her mother, I can't do that to her. But I don't know how to fix this." I'd held him that night, this man I loved, who was drowning in shame and terror, and I'd made a decision that would define the rest of our marriage. I used my entire life savings, over $50,000, plus loans that took me years to pay off, to make restitution to his former employer. But more than that, I used my professional connections and administrative skills to create a paper trail that would protect him. I fabricated records showing that the missing money had been the result of accounting errors rather than deliberate theft. I coached him through meetings with investigators, helped him present a convincing case for innocent mistakes rather than criminal intent. I'd saved Arthur from prison, protected Emma from losing her father, and ensured that our family could start fresh without the shadow of his past hanging over us. The stress nearly broke me, and I'd had to take a leave of absence from my job to manage the crisis, but I'd done it out of love. Arthur had sworn he'd never forget what I'd done for him. He'd promised that he'd take care of me always, that he'd make sure I was protected and provided for, because I'd risked everything to save him. Now listening to Emma laugh about making me penniless, about ensuring I got nothing from the estate I'd helped protect, I felt the bitter irony crushing my chest. The woman I'd saved from losing her father to prison was now using that father's will to destroy me. The next morning brought a new legal assault. Mr. Davies arrived at Margaret's door with another set of papers. "Mrs. Morrison," he said with obvious satisfaction, "my clients have a generous settlement offer for you." I read the papers with growing horror. If I would immediately sign over the deed to my fully paid-off home from my first marriage, a property worth over $500,000 to Arthur's estate, and if I would publicly confess to financial mismanagement during my marriage to Arthur, then Emma would graciously agree not to file criminal charges against me for child abuse. "Child abuse," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "My clients have documented evidence of emotional and financial abuse," Mr. Davies said smoothly. "Your inappropriate control over Emma's life, your manipulation of her father's finances, your isolation of the family from their blood relatives. Sign these papers and we'll consider the matter closed." I looked at those documents at the demand that I confess to crimes I'd never committed, give up the only security I had left, and accept responsibility for abusing the child I'd loved and protected for 8 years. It was designed to break me completely, to take not just my home and my husband and my stepdaughter, but my integrity, my self-respect, and my future. But as I stared at those papers, I felt something I hadn't felt since this nightmare began. Not despair, not defeat, but a cold, righteous anger that reminded me exactly who I was. I was Linda Morrison, the woman who'd spent her career protecting families from predators and manipulators. The woman who'd documented everything, who'd built cases methodically, who'd never backed down from a fight when vulnerable people needed protection. And Emma, in her arrogance and cruelty, had just made the mistake of threatening me with charges related to the very thing I'd spent my life fighting against, the abuse of children. She had no idea what she'd just awakened. The legal papers arrived by certified mail on a gray Thursday morning that felt like the end of the world. Margaret signed for them with shaking hands, her face pale, as she read the return address. "Linda," she whispered, "I think you need to see this." The documents were thick and official, stamped with court seals that made my blood run cold. Emma had obtained an emergency temporary restraining order against me based on allegations so twisted and vicious that I had to read them 3 times before they sank in. According to the filing, I had emotionally and financially abused Emma throughout our 8-year relationship. I had isolated her from her maternal family, manipulated her father's finances for my own benefit, and created an atmosphere of fear and control that had traumatized her for years. The restraining order prohibited me from coming within 500 feet of Emma Brenda or the house that had been my home. Any violation would result in immediate arrest. "This can't be legal," Margaret said, reading over my shoulder. "You can't just make up accusations and get a restraining order." But apparently you could. Emma's lawyer had been thorough, presenting carefully edited communications and selectively quoted conversations to paint me as a predatory older woman who'd wormed her way into a vulnerable family and then terrorized them from within. The cruelest part was that some of the evidence was real, just completely twisted. My text to Emma about budgeting her allowance became financial control. My gentle corrections about her attitude became emotional abuse. My efforts to maintain family traditions after Arthur's death became obsessive behavior and inability to accept boundaries. That afternoon, the moving truck arrived. I stood across the street, legally prohibited from setting foot on my own property, and watched strangers carry 8 years of my life out the front door. Furniture I'd chosen with Arthur artwork we'd picked out together, even my gardening tools, and the rocking chair where I'd held Emma through countless bedtime stories. Emma stood in the doorway, supervising the removal of my existence from her life. When she saw me watching, she didn't look away or show even a flicker of shame. Instead, she pulled out her phone and took a picture of me standing there homeless and broken, as if she wanted to memorialize her victory. I tried one last time to reach the girl I'd loved and raised. Pulling out my own phone, I sent her a text message that I poured my heart into. "Emma, please. I know you're hurting and I know you're angry, but this isn't who you really are. I raised you to be kind and compassionate. This was our home, our family. I loved your father with everything I had, and I love you too. Can't we find a way to honor his memory together? Instead of destroying each other, please remember the love we shared." Her response came within minutes, and it shattered what was left of my heart. "Consider this closed, Linda. You lose. Don't contact me again. Ever. You're causing too much trouble with your craziness." That evening, Brenda began her victory lap. She called everyone in our former social circle, spreading the news about my true nature and Emma's brave decision to protect herself from my unstable behavior. I always knew there was something off about her, I heard through a mutual friend. Poor Emma has been living in fear for years, but she was too loyal to her father to say anything while he was alive. Thank God she finally found the courage to get help. Within days, I was a pariah in the community where I'd lived and worked for decades. Former friends crossed the street to avoid me. Neighbors who'd shared barbecues and holiday celebrations for years suddenly found reasons to be busy when I called. I was utterly alone, with no home, no family, and no future that I could envision. That night, sitting in Margaret's living room, surrounded by the few personal belongings I'd been allowed to keep, I finally broke down completely. The grief, the betrayal, the systematic destruction of everything I'd built and loved, all of it, crashed over me like a crushing wave. But in that moment of complete despair, a memory surfaced that I'd buried so deeply, I'd almost convinced myself it never happened. The real truth about Emma's mother, the secret that Arthur had begged me to keep the lie I'd helped him maintain for 8 years. Emma's mother hadn't died from a sudden illness, as we'd always told Emma. She'd suffered from severe postpartum psychosis after Emma's birth, a condition that had gone undiagnosed and untreated because of the stigma surrounding mental health. The depression and paranoia had consumed her, leading to increasingly erratic behavior that had terrified Arthur and traumatized baby Emma. The night she died, she'd been found at the bottom of the basement stairs, surrounded by empty pill bottles. Whether it was suicide or an accidental overdose during a psychotic episode, no one could say for certain. But Arthur had been consumed with guilt, convinced that he should have done more, should have recognized the signs, should have gotten her help. When Arthur and I married, Emma was still having nightmares about the scary lady who used to live in their house. She'd been only 3 when her mother died, but the trauma had left deep scars. Arthur had begged me to help him create a different story for Emma, one that would give her peace, instead of questions, closure instead of fear. Together we'd crafted a narrative of a mother who'd been sick but peaceful, who'd loved Emma deeply and had simply been called home by God. I'd used my professional knowledge of child psychology to help Arthur present this story in a way that would heal rather than harm. I'd helped him remove all traces of his wife's mental health struggles from their home, replacing them with carefully chosen photos and mementos that supported our gentle fiction. For 8 years, I'd maintained that loving lie, allowing Emma to believe in a mother who'd been gentle and kind, rather than tortured and dangerous. I'd absorbed her questions, her grief, her occasional resentment about being abandoned, helping her process her loss in a healthy way. I'd sacrificed my own ethical standards as a mental health professional to protect a child from unbearable truth. I'd carried the weight of that deception, the complexity of loving someone while lying to them, because I'd believed it was the kindest thing to do. Now, sitting in the wreckage of my life, I realized the cosmic irony of what had happened. Emma, the child I'd protected from the truth about mental illness and instability, was now using accusations of my mental instability to destroy me. The girl I'd shielded from her mother's psychological breakdown was orchestrating my own psychological destruction. And worst of all, in painting me as an abusive, manipulative woman who targeted her vulnerable father, Emma, was unknowingly describing exactly what her mother had become in those final terrible months before her death. The very traits I'd helped Arthur hide in his first wife, Emma, was now attributing to me. As I sat there in the darkness holding the secret that had shaped 8 years of my life, I felt something shifting inside me. The devastating grief was crystallizing into something harder, something more purposeful. Emma thought she knew the truth about her family, about her father, about me. But she'd built her entire identity on a foundation of carefully constructed lies that I'd helped create out of love. If she wanted to destroy me using twisted truths and false accusations, then maybe it was time she learned what real truth looked like. Maybe it was time to stop protecting her from the very realities that would explain everything about why Arthur had clung to me so desperately, why he'd trusted me with secrets he'd never told anyone else. Maybe it was time to reveal the painful truth about the woman whose memory she was using as a weapon against me. The loving stepmother who'd spent 8 years protecting Emma from devastating truth was gone, destroyed by Emma's own cruelty. What remained was a woman who'd finally realized that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop lying, even when the truth would shatter everything the person you love believes about themselves. The days following my complete expulsion from the life I'd built felt like descending into a psychological prison of my own making. I found myself trapped in a terrifying abyss of isolation, carrying secrets so heavy they threatened to crush what remained of my sanity. The weight of Emma's mother's true death pressed against my chest like a stone. For 8 years, I'd carried the burden of that carefully constructed lie, telling Emma bedtime stories about her gentle, peaceful mother, while knowing the horrifying reality of mental illness, pill bottles, and a broken woman at the bottom of basement stairs. Now accused of being mentally unstable myself, I began to question everything I remembered, every choice I'd made. Had I been wrong to protect Emma from the truth? Had my years of loving deception somehow twisted into the very manipulation she now accused me of? The accusations of child abuse echoed in my mind, warping my memories until I couldn't tell the difference between protection and control, between love and possession. Margaret's small apartment felt like a cage. Every morning, I'd wake up disoriented, reaching for Arthur's hand that would never be there again, listening for Emma's voice, calling for breakfast from down the hall. The silence was deafening, filled with the ghosts of 8 years of family life that everyone now claimed had been toxic and harmful. But the psychological torment was nothing compared to what came next. Mr. Davies had been busy spreading his poison through the professional networks I'd spent decades building. Phone calls were made to community center boards, to family services, administrators, to the very organizations where I'd once been respected and valued. We're concerned about Linda Morrison's recent behavior. The calls would begin, always couched in false compassion. There have been some troubling incidents involving inappropriate boundaries with family members. We thought you should know, given her history of working with vulnerable populations. Within weeks, I received a series of devastating phone calls. The grief support group I'd facilitated for 5 years politely informed me they were restructuring and my services were no longer needed. The community board, where I'd served for over a decade, suddenly found my position redundant. Consulting contracts I'd relied on for supplemental income were quietly canceled always, with apologies and vague mentions of changing priorities. My entire professional reputation, built over 30 years of dedicated service, was being systematically dismantled by whispers and insinuations. I was becoming a pariah in the community where I'd once been a respected leader. The financial pressure mounted with each passing day. Legal fees for defending against Emma's restraining order were draining my savings. But worse was coming. Hidden in Arthur's carefully organized filing cabinets, Emma had discovered something that gave her even more ammunition against me, over $100,000 in unpaid debts that Arthur had been hiding from everyone, including me. Medical bills from his previous wife's treatment business loans. He'd defaulted on credit card debt that had been accumulating interest for years. According to the will that predated our marriage, Emma inherited not just the assets, but the debts as well. And according to Mr. Davies, since I'd been managing the household finances during our marriage, I was somehow responsible for these debts that I'd never even known existed. The lawsuit that followed was devastating in its scope. Emma was demanding that I pay the full $100,000 plus penalties and legal fees. My bank accounts were frozen, pending the outcome of the case. My small retirement savings disappeared into a legal black hole. Within a month, I was evicted from Margaret's apartment building when I couldn't make my rent contribution. The shelter I was forced to enter was a concrete block building filled with the sounds of other broken lives, other people who'd fallen through society's cracks. But the cruelest blow was yet to come. I learned about it from a well-meaning former colleague who thought I should know what was happening in my name. Emma had become the spokesperson for a local grief support charity, speaking about overcoming family trauma and finding safe spaces for healing. The newspaper article featured a large photo of Emma Beautiful and poised speaking at a podium to a room full of attentive listeners. The caption read, "Local young woman shares story of recovery and hope." In the article, Emma spoke carefully about growing up with challenging family dynamics and learning to recognize unhealthy emotional dependencies. She never mentioned me by name, but anyone who knew our family would understand exactly who she was describing. I learned that love shouldn't feel controlling or overwhelming, she was quoted as saying. Real family support means respecting boundaries and allowing people to grow independently. Included with the article was a drawing Emma had made for the charity's auction labeled My Happy Family. It showed a house with two figures standing together in sunshine, Emma and a man who was clearly meant to be Arthur. There was no third figure, no stepmother, no Linda. 8 years of family breakfasts, birthday celebrations, bedtime stories, and shared dreams had been erased as completely as if they'd never happened. I stared at that drawing until my vision blurred with tears, seeing the deliberate cruelty in its simplicity. This wasn't just about money or inheritance anymore. This was about erasing my very existence from the family narrative, rewriting history, to cast me as an unwelcome intruder rather than a loving wife and mother. That night, sitting in the shelter's common room, surrounded by the sounds of other people's despair, I seriously considered giving up entirely. What was the point of fighting when the very people I'd loved most were using my own love against me as evidence of my unworthiness? I was contemplating the bottle of sleeping pills I'd been prescribed for the nightmares when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Morrison. The voice was warm and familiar, though I couldn't immediately place it. This is Rebecca Chen. You probably don't remember me, but I was in your training program at the community center about 15 years ago. You were my supervisor when I was just starting out in family services. The memory came flooding back, a young woman barely out of graduate school who'd been overwhelmed by her first caseload of troubled families. I'd spent countless hours mentoring her, teaching her how to navigate the complex dynamics of abuse and recovery, helping her develop the instincts that would protect vulnerable children. Rebecca, I said softly, of course I remember you. You're director of the family center downtown now, aren't you? I am, thanks to everything you taught me. Mrs. Morrison, I've been following what's happening to you in the news, and I want you to know that I don't believe a word of it. You saved my career when I was ready to quit. You taught me how to recognize real abuse, real manipulation. What they're saying about you, it's not possible. Her words hit me like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. Rebecca, you don't understand the whole situation. There are things about my family, about my marriage, that are very complicated. Mrs. Morrison, I've been working in family services for 15 years now. I know manipulation when I see it, and what your stepdaughter is doing, what her lawyer is doing. It's textbook psychological abuse. You're being gaslighted on a massive scale. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was filled with determination. I've been talking to some of your former trainees, people whose careers you influenced over the years. We've put together a legal defense fund. We've also connected with a network of attorneys who specialize in elder abuse cases. Mrs. Morrison, this isn't over. You taught us never to give up on protecting people from predators, and we're not giving up on you. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't felt in months' hope. Not the naive hope I'd clung to when I thought love and reason could prevail, but something harder and more practical. The fierce determination that had driven me to protect vulnerable families for 30 years was beginning to stir again. Emma thought she'd destroyed me, But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd forgotten that I wasn't just a heartbroken stepmother. I was a professional who'd spent her career identifying and documenting patterns of abuse. And what she was doing to me, what Brenda was orchestrating, followed every textbook example of systematic psychological warfare I'd ever studied. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The notification appeared in my email like a poisoned dagger sent by a former colleague who thought I should know what was being done in the name of child protection. The subject line read, Family Values and Child Protection Seminar, keynote speaker Emma Morrison. My hands trembled as I opened the attachment on the shelter's single computer, waiting in line behind 3 other residents just to access the internet that had once been at my fingertips in my own home. Emma, the girl I'd raised from 11 years old, was being presented as a leading expert in fostering healthy family dynamics and protecting children from toxic influences. The promotional materials featured professional photos of her looking confident and authoritative with credentials that seemed to have materialized from nowhere. The seminar was being held at the city's largest conference center, sponsored by family service organizations I'd worked with for decades. The description promised to address the hidden dangers of emotional manipulation in family settings and recognizing the signs of psychological abuse from trusted authority figures. Every word was a calculated attack on everything I'd built my career around. The methods I'd used to help troubled families heal, the gentle guidance I'd provided to hundreds of children over the years, were being reframed as manipulation and abuse. I managed to scrape together enough money for a day pass to the public library where I could watch the live stream of the seminar. What I saw there nearly broke me completely. Emma took the stage, looking every inch the professional expert dressed in a tailored suit that I realized with a sick feeling had been purchased with money from Arthur's estate, money that should have provided for both of us. Today, I want to share with you a case study. She began her voice steady and practiced of how even well-meaning adults can create environments of psychological control that masquerade as love and protection. She wasn't just talking about me. She was systematically dismantling my entire professional philosophy, using our family as an example of everything that could go wrong when boundaries weren't properly maintained. The adult in question, Emma continued never mentioning my name, but making it clear who she meant, used techniques that appeared nurturing on the surface, extra attention, emotional support that seemed caring, financial assistance that created dependency. But underneath these behaviors were designed to create obligation to make the child feel grateful and therefore unable to recognize inappropriate control. I watched in horror as my years of loving care were recontextualized as manipulation. Every time I'd helped Emma with homework became academic control. Every family tradition I'd maintained became forced emotional intimacy. Every sacrifice I'd made became evidence of my own psychological need to be needed. The audience was nodding along, taking notes, treating Emma's twisted narrative as gospel truth. These were professionals I'd worked with, people who should have recognized the signs of coach testimony, but they were accepting Emma's performance as authentic revelation. Brenda took the stage next, speaking about the importance of recognizing when outside influences become toxic to family harmony. She presented herself as the wise family elder who'd recognized the threat I posed and courageously intervened to protect Emma. Sometimes, Brenda said, looking directly into the camera, love means being willing to be seen as the villain in order to protect someone who can't protect themselves. Emma was trapped in a cycle of emotional dependency, but she was too young and too grateful to recognize it for what it was. Then came the video that shattered my heart completely. Chloe, my other stepdaughter, appeared on screen in what was clearly a professionally produced segment. At 17, she should have been old enough to resist coaching, but the words coming out of her mouth sounded nothing like the girl I'd helped raise. "I used to think the constant checking in was normal," she said, looking earnestly into the camera. "The way she always wanted to know where I was, who I was, with how I was feeling. She called it caring, but it felt suffocating. I'm so grateful to my sister for helping me understand that I have the right to privacy, to emotional boundaries. Privacy, boundaries." The normal concern of a parent for a teenager's safety had been twisted into evidence of my controlling nature. Every curfew, every question about her friends, every moment of worry when she was late coming home, all reframed as psychological abuse. But the most devastating part came when Arthur's extended family appeared as a panel of expert witnesses. His brother, his cousin people who'd shared Christmas dinners at our table for years, sat in front of the camera and spoke about their growing concerns about my behavior. "We always felt like Linda was trying to isolate Arthur from his family," his brother said. "She seemed to need to be the center of attention to control every family gathering. We were afraid to say anything because we didn't want to cause problems, but looking back, we can see the pattern. The pattern. As if my efforts to create warm, welcoming family gatherings had been some kind of sinister plot rather than the natural actions of a woman trying to build a loving home." Mr. Davies appeared as the legal expert, discussing the signs of psychological manipulation and the difficulty of prosecuting such cases, because the victims often don't recognize what's happening to them. "These situations are particularly tragic," he said, "because the perpetrator often believes they're acting out of love. They've convinced themselves that their controlling behavior is protective, that their need to be needed is actually generosity." He was describing me as if I were a case study in pathological behavior, using clinical language to make my love sound like mental illness. As I sat in that library, watching my entire life's work being systematically destroyed by people who'd never spent a day working with troubled families, I felt something breaking inside me that I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. But then I noticed something in the comments section of the live stream. Not everyone was buying Emma's performance. "This sounds rehearsed," one viewer wrote. "The body language doesn't match someone sharing real trauma." "I worked with Linda Morrison years ago," wrote another. "This description doesn't match the woman I knew at all." "Something feels off about this presentation," added a third. "Too polished, too perfect." A few brave souls were questioning the narrative, recognizing that Emma's smooth presentation lacked the raw authenticity of genuine trauma survivors. Professional counselors who'd worked with real abuse victims were noting inconsistencies in her story. The seed of doubt had been planted. Emma's performance was so polished, so perfectly crafted to destroy me, that it was beginning to feel artificial to people who knew what real abuse recovery looked like. As I walked back to the shelter that evening, I realized that Emma had made a crucial mistake. In her eagerness to destroy me completely, she'd overplayed her hand. The seminar had been too perfect, too comprehensive, too focused on discrediting me rather than helping other families. To professionals who understood family dynamics, Emma's presentation would raise red flags, not about me, but about her. The very perfection of her attack was going to become the foundation of her downfall. The final financial assault came with the precision of a military operation designed to strip away every last vestige of security and dignity I had left. The lawsuit papers arrived by certified mail at the shelter, thick documents that felt heavy with malice, in my trembling hands. Emma was suing me for $1 million in damages for emotional distress and reputational harm. According to the filing, my harassment campaign and erratic behavior had caused her severe psychological trauma, requiring extensive therapy and medication. My false allegations about Arthur's past had damaged her standing in the community and interfered with her emerging career as a family advocate. Each accusation was a masterpiece of twisted logic. My desperate attempts to maintain contact with my stepdaughter became stalking. My efforts to explain our family history became defamation. My grief over losing my husband and home became mental instability that posed a threat to community safety. But the lawsuit was just the opening move in what would become total financial annihilation. Within days, I received official notifications from the retirement fund administrators who managed my pension from 30 years of community service. Concerns had been raised about my mental competency and professional conduct. An investigation was being launched into allegations of misconduct during my tenure as program director. The accusations were vague but devastating. Someone had suggested that I'd shown inappropriate favoritism to certain families, that I'd overstepped professional boundaries in my work with vulnerable children, that my recent erratic behavior raised questions about my fitness to receive retirement benefits. My pension payments stopped immediately. My retirement savings were frozen pending the outcome of the investigation. The professional honors I'd received over the years were quietly revoked, my name removed from plaques and award lists as if my 3 decades of service had never happened. The message was clear. Not only would I lose everything I had, but my life's work would be erased as if it had never mattered. The eviction from the shelter came next. Without any income, I couldn't even afford the minimal fees for emergency housing. I found myself on the street again this time, with nothing but a shopping cart containing the few possessions I'd managed to save from the wreckage of my life. The local news covered my eviction with barely concealed satisfaction. The story ran with the headline, "Former Community Director Evicted Amid Misconduct Allegations." The accompanying photo showed me loading my belongings into the cart, looking every inch the Homeless Women's Society had decided I deserved to become. But Brenda wasn't finished with her campaign of humiliation. 3 days after my eviction made the news, the local paper ran a feature story about a generous donation to the community. Emma and Brenda had funded the construction of a new youth wellness center, a beautiful facility dedicated to counseling and mental health services for at-risk children. The dedication ceremony was elaborate, with local officials praising the Morrison family's commitment to child welfare. Emma stood at the podium in a designer dress that probably cost more than I'd spend on food in 6 months, speaking about their family's dedication to protecting children from harmful influences. This wellness center represents our commitment to creating safe spaces where young people can heal from trauma and learn healthy relationship patterns, she announced to the gathered crowd. We believe every child deserves protection from toxic influences, whether they come from strangers or from people they've been taught to trust. The bitter irony made me physically ill. The wellness center had been funded with money from Arthur's estate money that should have supported my retirement. They'd literally built a monument to their own virtue using the financial foundation they'd stolen from me. In the photos accompanying the article, Emma stood proudly beside a plaque that read, "The Arthur Morrison Center for Family Healing." My husband's name was being used to commemorate the very facility that celebrated my destruction. The living conditions on the street were brutal. Summer heat gave way to autumn rain, and I spent my days moving from one public space to another, trying to stay warm and dry, while maintaining some shred of dignity. The physical toll was devastating, but the emotional cost was even worse. I watched former colleagues cross the street to avoid me. I saw people I'd helped during their own family crises turn away when they spotted me outside the grocery store. The community that had once respected and valued my work now saw me as a cautionary tale, a reminder of how quickly someone could fall from grace. The stress, the malnutrition, the constant fear and exposure all converged into a perfect storm of physical breakdown. I was waiting outside the public library on a cold Tuesday morning, hoping to use their restroom and maybe find a warm place to sit for a few hours when the heart attack hit. The pain was immediate and crushing, radiating down my left arm as the world spun around me. I collapsed on the concrete steps where I'd once walked confidently as a respected professional, reduced to another homeless person having a medical emergency. The paramedics found me unconscious, clutching a library card that was my only remaining identification. In the emergency room, as the doctors worked to stabilize my condition, I drifted in and out of consciousness, my mind retreating into memories that felt safer than the reality I faced. But in those twilight moments between consciousness and unconsciousness, something remarkable happened. A memory surfaced that I'd buried so deeply I'd almost forgotten it existed. 15 years earlier, I'd worked with a family where a manipulative parent had systematically turned their children against the other parent through a campaign of lies and emotional manipulation. The parent had been charming and convincing, presenting themselves as the protective figure while painting their ex-spouse as unstable and dangerous. I documented the pattern, then recognized the signs of what psychologists call parental alienation syndrome. I'd fought to protect those children from being used as weapons in their parents' psychological warfare. As the memory became clearer, I realized with shocking clarity what I was seeing. Emma's treatment of me, her systematic campaign to turn everyone against me, followed the exact same pattern I'd identified in that long-ago case. She was using textbook manipulation techniques, coached by Brenda and enabled by Mr. Davies, to rewrite our family history and paint me as the villain in a story where I'd been the victim. The woman I'd helped raise from childhood was employing the same tactics I'd spent my career fighting against. And I had the professional knowledge and experience to recognize it, document it, and expose it. As I lay in that hospital bed machines monitoring my failing heart, I felt something shift inside me. The devastating realization gave me a framework for understanding what had happened to me, but more importantly, it gave me the tools to fight back. I wasn't just a victim of family cruelty. I was a case study in systematic psychological abuse and financial exploitation. And if there was one thing I knew how to do, it was build a case that would stand up in court. When Rebecca arrived at the hospital summoned by the emergency contact information I'd given the shelter, she found me weak but determined. "Mrs. Morrison, thank God you're alive. When we heard you'd collapsed," I gripped her hand with what little strength I had. "Rebecca, I need you to contact those lawyers you mentioned. Tell them I'm ready to fight, but this time we're not just defending against their attacks. We're going on the offense." "What do you mean?" "I mean Emma made a mistake when she decided to use psychological manipulation as her weapon of choice. What she's doing to me, what Brenda is orchestrating, it's textbook parental alienation and financial abuse. And unlike family disputes, those things leave evidence. Those things leave witnesses. Those things leave a paper trail we can follow." For the first time in months, I felt like I was thinking like a program director again, building a case, documenting patterns, protecting vulnerable people from predators who hid behind facades of concern and love, Emma had destroyed my life, but in doing so, she'd exposed herself as exactly the kind of person I'd spent my career fighting against. And now I had both the motivation and the expertise to destroy her. Recovery from the heart attack was slow and painful, but it gave me something I hadn't had in months' time to think clearly without the constant pressure of survival. The hospital's social worker had helped me secure temporary housing in a transitional facility, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I had a quiet space to plan my counterattack. With Rebecca's help and the growing network of former colleagues who'd rallied to my defense, I'd managed to understand the scope of Emma and Brenda's conspiracy. But I knew that proving their crimes would require more than just documentation. It would require catching them in the act of their deception. That's when I decided to make one final appeal to Emma's conscience. Using the facility's computer, I carefully crafted a video message that laid out everything I'd discovered. I detailed Emma's systematic campaign of psychological manipulation, Brenda's financial exploitation, and most importantly, the evidence I'd gathered showing how they were using the very techniques I'd spent my career identifying and stopping. But the most crucial part of my message was when I played the audio recordings I'd saved from our early conversations after Arthur's death. Emma's voice cold and calculating as she discussed getting Mom's money and ensuring I ended up penniless and broken. Her casual remarks about my illness, her callous laughter when discussing my homelessness. Emma, I said, looking directly into the camera, I've listened to these recordings countless times trying to find some trace of the loving girl I raised. But what I hear is someone who's been twisted by greed and manipulation into something I don't recognize. Then I revealed the card I'd been holding back, the secret that had shaped 8 years of our family life. Your mother didn't die the way your father told you she did, I said gently. She suffered from severe mental illness after your birth, Emma. Postpartum psychosis that went untreated because of the stigma surrounding mental health. The night she died, she was found at the bottom of the basement stairs, surrounded by empty pill bottles. I watched my own image on the screen, seeing the pain in my eyes as I revealed the truth I'd protected Emma from for so long. Your father asked me to help him create a different story for you, one that would give you peace instead of questions. We told you she died peacefully because we wanted you to have happy memories instead of trauma. I've carried that secret for 8 years, protecting you from a truth we thought would hurt you. I paused, letting the weight of that revelation sink in before continuing. But now you're using accusations of mental instability against me, Emma. The very woman who protected you from the reality of your mother's mental illness is being destroyed by claims that she's mentally ill herself. Can't you see the cruel irony in that? I ended the video with a plea that came from the deepest part of my heart. I'm not asking you to love me again, Emma. I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. I'm asking you to remember the woman who raised you, who protected you, who sacrificed everything to give you a stable, loving home. Don't let greed and manipulation turn you into someone who destroys the people who love them most. I sent the video through an encrypted email service, hoping it would reach Emma when she was alone, when she might be able to see past the poison Brenda had been feeding her. I should have known that Brenda would intercept it. 2 days later, Rebecca called me in a panic. Mrs. Morrison, you need to turn on Channel 7. They're showing your video, but something's not right about it. What I saw on the news made my blood run cold. There was my video, but it had been edited, manipulated, transformed into something monstrous. My careful explanation of Emma's manipulation had been cut and spliced to sound like paranoid rambling. Background noise had been added to make my voice sound shaky and unstable. My revelation about Emma's mother had been edited to make it sound like I was threatening to expose family secrets unless Emma gave me money. The news anchor introduced the segment with barely concealed excitement. Tonight, an exclusive look at disturbing video messages sent by a former community director to her estranged stepdaughter, warning some viewers may find this content deeply troubling. Brenda had sold my private message to a tabloid news program, but not before having it professionally altered to support her narrative of my mental breakdown. The legitimate concerns I'd raised were dismissed as elaborate delusions, while the manipulated portions were highlighted as proof of my deteriorating grip on reality. But the cruelest betrayal came next. Emma appeared on camera in what looked like a therapist's office with my grandson Ethan beside her. At 8 years old, he looked so much like Emma had at that age that it broke my heart to see him being used as a prop in this psychological warfare. This is incredibly difficult for our family, Emma said, her voice breaking in all the right places. Linda was once someone we loved and trusted, but over the past year, her behavior has become increasingly erratic and concerning. The interviewer leaned forward with practiced sympathy. This must be especially hard, given your stepmother's background in family counseling. Emma nodded, wiping away what appeared to be a genuine tear. That's what makes it so tragic. She spent her career helping families, and now we have to protect our children from her. It's heartbreaking to watch someone you care about deteriorate like this. Then they turned to Ethan, my precious grandson, whom I'd barely seen since Arthur's death. Ethan, the interviewer said gently, I know this is hard to talk about, but can you tell us how you're feeling about your grandmother? Ethan looked directly into the camera, and I could see the coaching in his careful words. I wish Grandma Linda well, he said, his voice small but clear. I hope she gets the help she needs, but I'm glad my mom is protecting me from her scary messages. Scary messages. Phone calls I'd never made because the restraining order legally prevented me from contacting him. But in the narrative they'd constructed, I was a deranged woman harassing a frightened child. The program concluded with Brenda making a brief appearance standing beside Emma in what looked like a press conference setting. She spoke about the importance of protecting children from unstable adults and the family's commitment to healing and moving forward. We just want Linda to get the help she desperately needs. Brenda said, managing to look both compassionate and resolute. But our first priority has to be protecting the children from further emotional trauma. The news segment went viral within hours. Social media exploded with commentary about the deranged stepmother and praise for Emma's courage in speaking out. Mental health advocates used my story as an example of how untreated psychological issues could turn elderly people into threats to their own families. But in the midst of this nightmare, something unexpected happened. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a school counselor who'd worked with Emma during her teenage years, appeared on a competing news program the next night. She'd watched the viral video and felt compelled to speak out. I worked closely with Emma Morrison when she was in high school, she told the anchor. I have extensive notes about her family dynamics during that time, and what I'm seeing now doesn't match the reality I witnessed then. She displayed pages of carefully documented observations about our family interactions, notes about Emma's positive relationship with me, records of my involvement in school activities, and my obvious love for both Emma and Chloe. Linda Morrison was a devoted stepmother who went above and beyond for those girls, Dr. Martinez continued. The idea that she was abusive or manipulative is completely inconsistent with everything I observed over 4 years of working with this family. Other professionals began coming forward. Teachers who'd seen me at school events, neighbors who'd witnessed our family interactions, former colleagues who could speak to my character and competence. The competing narrative began to gain traction. Experts in media manipulation confirmed that my video had been heavily edited. Psychologists, familiar with parental alienation, recognized the patterns in Emma's behavior. But the damage had been done. In the court of public opinion, I'd been tried and convicted as a mentally unstable woman whose own family had courageously protected their children from my delusions. As I watched the media circus unfold from my small room in the transitional facility, I realized that Emma and Brenda had made their most serious mistake yet. By manipulating and selling my private communication, by using my grandson as a prop in their public relations campaign, they'd created evidence of crimes that went far beyond family disputes. They documented their own conspiracy to commit fraud, defamation, and elder abuse. And they'd done it all on national television with witnesses and experts already questioning their version of events. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was looking at the beginning of the end. Not my end, but theirs. The federal courthouse was packed beyond capacity on the morning of the trial that would change everything. News crews from across the country had gathered to cover what had become a landmark case in elder abuse law, and overflow crowds watched on screens that had been erected outside the building. Rebecca and her network had done more than just provide legal support. They'd uncovered a forgotten community fund I'd helped establish decades earlier, money set aside to protect vulnerable families from exactly the kind of abuse I was experiencing. The irony wasn't lost on me that a fund I'd created would now finance my own rescue. Dr. Patricia Williams, the elder law attorney leading my legal team, had assembled an unprecedented coalition: child psychologists, family court mediators, financial fraud experts, and my former colleague, Dr. Sarah Martinez, the school counselor who'd worked with Emma during her teenage years. The charges were extensive and serious: criminal elder abuse, financial fraud, conspiracy to commit defamation, and most importantly, the emotional manipulation of children. Emma and Brenda were facing federal time, and the FBI's involvement had elevated this from a family dispute to a criminal conspiracy case. But none of that mattered as much as what was about to be revealed in that courtroom. "Your Honor," Dr. Williams said, approaching the judge's bench with a small device in her hands, "the defense would like to present Exhibit A, unedited audio recordings from a voice-activated recording device that was part of Mrs. Morrison's home security system." I watched from the plaintiff's table as she explained how the decorative piece on my living room bookshelf had been equipped with a voice recorder installed by Arthur during his final illness, when he'd become paranoid about potential break-ins. Neither Emma nor I had known it was there, silently documenting our conversations during those crucial weeks after his death. The first recording was from just 3 weeks before Arthur passed away. His voice, weak but clear, filled the courtroom. "Emma, sweetheart, I need to talk to you about something important. I know this old will says you inherit everything, but that was written before I met Linda, before we became a family. I've been meaning to update it, but with my illness." Emma's younger voice responded, careful and non-committal. "Dad, you don't need to worry about that now. Just focus on getting better." "No, Emma, listen to me. Linda has given us everything. She saved me from my past mistakes. She raised you girls with nothing but love. She's been the heart of this family. This house belongs to both of you. Promise me you'll take care of her. She's family, Emma. This house is for both of you. There was a long pause before Emma's voice came through, distant and evasive. "Sure, Dad, of course." But Arthur pressed on, his voice growing stronger with emotion. "I love Linda more than I ever thought possible. She saved my life in ways you'll never understand. Promise me, Emma. Promise me you'll honor what we built together." "I promise, Dad," Emma said, but even through the recording, her reluctance was audible. The courtroom was silent as Arthur's voice faded, the weight of his words hanging in the air like a benediction from beyond the grave. But the second recording was what shattered Emma's carefully constructed facade. It was from 2 days after Arthur's funeral, a conversation between Emma and Brenda that I'd never heard in full. The old fool actually thought I'd share his precious house with that woman. Emma's voice said, cold and calculating in a way that made my blood freeze. "Can you believe he expected me to take care of Linda like she's actually family?" Brenda's laughter was cruel and sharp. "Honey, you don't owe that gold digger anything. Your father was manipulated into that marriage, and now you're free to set things right." "I want her out immediately," Emma continued. "No discussion, no negotiation. I want her homeless and broken, Brenda. I want her to understand that she never belonged here." "Leave that to me," Brenda replied. "I know exactly how to handle women like her. We'll make her look crazy unstable. By the time we're finished, no one will believe a word she says." The recording continued, documenting their conspiracy in chilling detail. How they would manipulate the legal system, how they would turn Emma's children against me, how they would systematically destroy my reputation and finances. When the recording ended, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. The jury sat stunned, and even the judge looked shaken by the raw malice they'd just heard. Brenda was called to testify first. As she approached the witness stand, I could see her confidence cracking. The composed, manipulative woman who'd orchestrated my destruction looked small and fragile under the courtroom lights. "Mrs. Brenda Coleman," the prosecutor began, "you've just heard a recording of yourself conspiring to financially and emotionally abuse Mrs. Morrison. Do you recognize your voice?" Brenda's response was barely audible. Yes, but you don't understand the context. The context of planning to make someone homeless and broken. The context of deliberately making someone look crazy." That's when Brenda's facade shattered completely. The woman who'd presented herself as Emma's caring aunt and my moral superior began sobbing with the raw desperation of someone whose true nature had been exposed to the world. We thought she was taking advantage." She stammered through her tears. "Emma deserved that house. It was supposed to be hers. Even though you heard Arthur explicitly state that the house was meant for both Emma and Linda." Brenda's breakdown was complete and devastating. She collapsed on the witness stand, weeping uncontrollably, her carefully maintained image of moral authority destroyed by her own recorded words. When Emma took the stand, the transformation was even more dramatic. The confident young woman, who'd built a career out of destroying my reputation, was gone, replaced by someone who looked physically diminished by the weight of her exposed cruelty. "Miss Emma Morrison," the prosecutor said, "do you recognize your voice on those recordings?" Emma's response was a whisper, "Yes." "And do you stand by your words about wanting Mrs. Morrison homeless and broken?" That's when Emma shattered. Her face crumpled, and she began sobbing with the intensity of someone whose entire self-image had just collapsed. "I don't know why I said those things," she cried. "I was angry and scared, and Brenda kept telling me that Linda was trying to steal what was rightfully mine. I let greed and fear turn me into someone I don't recognize." Mr. Davies attempted to flee the courtroom during Emma's breakdown, but court officers apprehended him at the door. His composed legal persona dissolved into panic as he realized his own role in the conspiracy was about to be exposed. The man who'd used his position to terrorize an innocent woman was reduced to begging security guards not to arrest him. Arthur's extended family, who'd been present to support Emma, sat in stunned silence as they processed the magnitude of the deception they'd enabled. The faces that had once looked at me with suspicion and disdain now showed dawning horror and remorse as they realized how completely they'd been manipulated. As I watched this courtroom full of people confront the truth about their own complicity in my destruction, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Arthur's death: complete vindication. Not just legal vindication, but moral vindication. The people who'd branded me as crazy, manipulative, and dangerous were now forced to confront their own cruelty, their own willingness to destroy an innocent woman based on lies and greed. But more than vindication, I felt profound sadness. Emma, the girl I'd raised and loved, had been consumed by greed and manipulation until she'd become someone capable of systematic cruelty. Brenda had revealed herself as someone whose moral compass was so broken she could orchestrate the destruction of a grieving widow for money. The truth had set me free, but it had also revealed just how much damage people could do when they chose greed over love, manipulation over honesty. Justice was coming, but it would be bittersweet. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned to the packed courtroom, their faces told the story before the foreman even spoke. On the charge of criminal elder abuse, we find the defendant, Emma Morrison, guilty. On the charge of financial fraud, we find the defendant, Emma Morrison, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit defamation, we find the defendant, Emma Morrison, guilty. The list went on and on. Emma sat motionless as her fate was sealed, while Brenda wept quietly beside her. Mr. Davies, who'd been charged as an accessory for his role in the conspiracy, stared straight ahead with the blank expression of someone whose world had collapsed. Judge Margaret Chen, a respected federal judge known for her fairness in elder abuse cases, delivered the sentences with the gravity the crimes deserved. Miss Emma Morrison, she said, "Your systematic campaign of abuse against your stepmother represents some of the most calculated cruelty this court has encountered. You exploited the trust of a woman who'd raised you with nothing but love, manipulated vulnerable adults, and used the legal system itself as a weapon against an innocent person. You are sentenced to 10 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation." Brenda received 7 years, while Mr. Davies faced disbarment, and 3 years for his role in enabling the conspiracy. The financial restitution was comprehensive: the full value of my home emotional damages, legal fees, and my lost retirement benefits. But more important than the sentences was Judge Chen's formal statement clearing my name. This court finds that Mrs. Linda Morrison has been the victim of one of the most systematic campaigns of elder abuse this jurisdiction has seen. Her character as an educator and advocate for families is beyond reproach. Her actions throughout this ordeal demonstrate extraordinary courage and integrity in the face of unprecedented cruelty. This court hereby formally vindicates Mrs. Morrison's reputation and acknowledges the profound injustice she has suffered. The vindication was complete and public broadcast live to millions of viewers who had followed the case. Editorial pages across the country condemned the abuse I'd suffered and praised my courage in fighting back. Support groups for elder abuse victims cited my case as an example of why speaking truth to power matters even when the power comes from within your own family. But for me, the most important moment came when I finally returned to my home. Walking through the front door of the house Arthur and I had shared felt like stepping back into my own life after a nightmare. Everything had been restored with the settlement money, but more than that, it felt like a sanctuary again. The rooms where I'd been humiliated and threatened were filled with peace once more. 3 weeks after the sentencing, I received a letter from Emma in prison. Her handwriting was shaky, nothing like the confident script I remembered from her childhood thank you notes. "Dear Linda," it began, "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, and I'm not writing to request it. I'm writing because I need you to know that I understand now what I did to you, and I am horrified by the person I became." The letter went on for pages, detailing her therapy sessions, her growing understanding of how Brenda had manipulated her grief and greed, her recognition of the love and sacrifice I'd shown her throughout her childhood. "I destroyed the one person who loved me unconditionally," she wrote. "I turned into exactly the kind of person you spent your career protecting people from. I don't expect you to ever forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I see the truth now, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to become worthy of the love you showed me." I read that letter sitting in the kitchen where we'd shared thousands of meals together, where I'd helped her with homework and listened to her teenage heartbreaks. The girl I'd loved was still there, buried under years of manipulation and poor choices finally beginning to surface. Michael, my son, from my first marriage, had been conspicuously absent during my ordeal, but after the trial he appeared at my door with tears in his eyes and a letter of his own. "Mom," he said, "I was a coward. I knew what Emma and Brenda were doing was wrong, but I was afraid to get involved. I let you suffer alone because I didn't want to deal with the conflict. I failed you as a son, and I'll spend the rest of my life making up for it." His remorse was genuine and profound. Michael moved back to town and began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship, attending therapy to understand his own patterns of avoidance and conflict aversion. Arthur's extended family approached me with similar humility. His brother, his cousins, people who'd shared holiday dinners with us for years, came to my door with tearful apologies. "Linda," Arthur's brother said, "we let ourselves be manipulated because it was easier than thinking for ourselves. We failed Arthur's memory, and we failed you. If you'll let us, we'd like to be the family Arthur always wanted us to be." But perhaps the most heartbreaking and hopeful reunion was with my grandchildren. Ethan and Chloe had been profoundly traumatized by their mother's imprisonment and the public revelation of her crimes. They were in therapy, trying to process the reality that the woman they'd trusted had used them as weapons against someone who'd only ever loved them. When they first came to visit me, they were tentative and confused, carrying the weight of guilt they didn't deserve. Grandma Linda, 8-year-old Ethan, said, his voice small and uncertain, "I said mean things about you on TV. I'm sorry. I didn't know they were lies." I held both children while they cried, these innocent victims of adult cruelty who'd been taught to reject the grandmother who'd always loved them. "You have nothing to apologize for," I told them. "You were children being manipulated by adults. The only thing that matters now is that we love each other, and we're going to rebuild our family on truth instead of lies." Slowly, carefully, we began to heal. The children spent weekends with me, learning to trust again, asking questions about their family history, beginning to understand the complex dynamics that had shaped their young lives. My professional reputation was fully restored, and I was invited to speak at conferences across the country about elder abuse, parental alienation, and the importance of standing up to systematic manipulation within families. But more important than professional vindication was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that my story was helping other families avoid the kind of destruction we'd experienced. Every time someone recognized the warning signs of financial exploitation because they'd heard me speak, every time a step-parent found the courage to fight for their place in their family, every time a family chose truth over comfortable lies, I felt the deep purpose that had always driven my life reassert itself. As the months passed and our healing continued, I realized that while justice had been served, the real victory was quieter and more personal. It was Michael slowly earning back my trust through consistent actions instead of empty promises. It was Arthur's family becoming the loving, supportive network Arthur had always wanted them to be. It was Ethan and Chloe gradually learning to trust again, to believe in love that didn't come with conditions or manipulation. Most importantly, it was the gradual return of something I thought was lost forever, my sense of safety and belonging in my own life. The legal victory was complete, but the real victory was the restoration of authentic love in place of manipulation, truth in place of lies, and courage in place of fear. 2 years after the trial ended, I stood in my garden on a warm spring morning, watching Ethan and Chloe help me plant tomatoes for the season. Michael was grilling breakfast on the patio, while Arthur's brother and his wife set the table for our weekly family brunch, a tradition we'd rebuilt from the ashes of our shattered relationships. My house had become what I'd always intended it to be, a sanctuary of authentic love and honest communication, a place where family meant protection and support rather than manipulation and fear. The physical restoration had been thorough. New furniture replaced what had been sold during my eviction. Fresh paint covered the memories of betrayal, and Arthur's study had been converted into a bright craft room where the grandchildren and I worked on art projects together. But the emotional restoration had gone much deeper. My relationship with Michael had been completely rebuilt on a foundation of honesty we'd never had before. He'd learned to face conflict instead of avoiding it, and I'd learned to trust again, slowly and carefully, but completely. I spent so many years being afraid of other people's emotions, Michael had told me during one of our weekly therapy sessions together. But watching you fight for your dignity, watching you refuse to back down when everyone turned against you, taught me what real courage looks like. Emma's letters from prison arrived monthly, documenting her slow journey toward understanding and redemption. She was working with a therapist who specialized in helping people who'd committed family violence, learning to understand the patterns that had led to her cruelty. "I'm not writing to ask for anything," her most recent letter had said. "I'm writing because I need you to know that everything good in me came from you. The woman I'm trying to become in here is based on the lessons you taught me when I was young, before I let greed and manipulation poison my heart." While our relationship would never return to what it had been, there was something honest and real growing between us now. Emma was taking responsibility for her actions, not trying to minimize or excuse them, and that accountability was the foundation of any possible future reconciliation. Arthur's extended family had become the loving, supportive network he'd always dreamed of. His brother visited twice a week, and we'd grown close in ways that honored Arthur's memory while building something new and genuine. "Arthur always said you were the best thing that ever happened to our family," his brother had told me recently. "We were too stupid to see it then, but we see it now. You brought love and stability to all of us, and we threw it away for lies and manipulation." But perhaps the most rewarding relationship was with my grandchildren. Ethan and Chloe had flourished in therapy, learning to process their trauma while rebuilding their capacity for trust and authentic emotion. They spent every weekend with me, and during school breaks, they often stayed for weeks at a time. Grandma Linda, 12-year-old Chloe, had said to me recently, while we baked cookies together, "I'm writing a report for school about heroes, and I want to write about you. Is that okay?" When I asked her why she considered me a hero, her answer made me cry. "Because you never gave up on loving us even when everyone told you to. You fought for our family even when it looked impossible. And you taught us that real love means telling the truth even when it's hard." My work as an advocate had expanded beyond anything I'd imagined. My memoir, When Family Becomes the Enemy, A Stepmother's Fight for Dignity, had become a bestseller and was being used in law schools and social work programs as a case study in elder abuse and family manipulation. But more rewarding than professional recognition was the direct impact I was having on other families. My weekly support group for elder abuse survivors had grown to over 50 members, and I'd helped dozens of families recognize and escape from situations similar to what I'd experienced. "You saved my life," an elderly man had told me just last week. "My daughter was doing exactly what Emma did to you, and if I hadn't heard your story, I would have signed over everything I owned just to keep the peace." Every Tuesday evening, I offered free family counseling sessions at the community center, helping step families navigate the complex dynamics of blended homes without losing themselves to manipulation or fear. The work was challenging but deeply fulfilling. Every family I helped heal was a testament to the power of truth over lies, love over greed, courage over fear. Brenda remained in prison serving her sentence and reportedly refusing all therapy or counseling programs. She'd become a cautionary tale, a reminder of how completely greed and manipulation could destroy someone's capacity for human connection. Mr. Davies had been disbarred and was working as a paralegal in a small firm, his reputation and career destroyed by his role in our conspiracy. The legal community had rallied around my case, using it as an example of how attorneys could be held accountable for enabling abuse. But for all the justice that had been served, the real victory was quieter and more personal. Standing in my garden that morning, listening to my grandchildren's laughter and watching my rebuilt family work together to plant seeds for the future, I felt a profound sense of completeness. Not because our family was perfect now, but because it was real. We'd learned to disagree without attacking, to support, without enabling, to love without losing ourselves. We'd discovered that true family loyalty meant protecting each other from harm, not covering up each other's failures. That evening, as we cleaned up from brunch and prepared for another week, Ethan approached me with a serious expression. "Grandma Linda," he said, "I've been thinking about something. Do you think you would have been happier if you just stayed quiet when Mom was being mean, if you just accepted what she wanted?" I considered his question carefully, this child who'd lived through the consequences of both his mother's cruelty and my decision to fight back. "No, sweetheart," I said finally. "I would have been safer in the short term, but I wouldn't have been happier. And more importantly, staying quiet would have told your mother that it was okay to treat people that way. Sometimes fighting for what's right is harder than staying silent, but it's the only way things ever get better." He nodded solemnly, processing this lesson about courage and consequences that most children never have to learn so young. That night, as I sat on my front porch watching the stars emerge, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment of peace. I'd lost years of my life to other people's cruelty, suffered humiliation and homelessness, nearly died from the stress of systematic abuse. But I'd also discovered reserves of strength I hadn't known I possessed, learned the difference between love and enabling, and found the courage to demand the respect and dignity that every human being deserves. Most importantly, I'd learned that truth really does prevail, but not automatically and not without cost. Justice requires courage, persistence, and the willingness to endure temporary pain for permanent healing. As I settled into bed that night, surrounded by the quiet sounds of a home filled with authentic love, I felt the deep satisfaction of a life reclaimed, a spirit freed, and a legacy built on unconditional love and unwavering courage. Years have passed since that terrible day when Emma showed me Arthur's will and demanded I leave the only home I'd known as his wife. As I sit in my garden this morning, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of hope, I can barely recognize the broken woman I once was. My home is filled with authentic love again. Michael has become the son I always knew he could be, standing strong and protective, his courage finally matching his love. Arthur's family visits regularly, bringing laughter and genuine affection, their relationships with me, now built on truth rather than obligation. Ethan and Chloe, now teenagers, stop by after school for homework help and heart-to-heart conversations, our bond stronger than ever, because it was rebuilt on honesty rather than manipulation. The woman who once cowered before her stepdaughter's greed, who accepted blame for protecting her own dignity, who nearly died from the weight of others' betrayal, has been transformed into someone I'm proud to be. Not because I sought revenge, but because I chose courage over comfort, truth over peace, and authentic love over fear. My work continues. Every week, I counsel families torn apart by manipulation and financial abuse. I see my own story reflected in their pain, and I'm able to offer them something precious, proof that healing is possible, that truth does prevail, and that love, when it's real and healthy, always finds a way to survive. The deepest lesson I've learned is this: our greatest strength isn't in avoiding conflict, but in having the courage to confront cruelty when we see it, especially when it comes from people we love. True family loyalty means protecting each other from harm, not enabling each other's worst impulses. And sometimes the most loving thing we can do is refuse to accept unacceptable behavior, even when that refusal costs us everything we thought we wanted. To anyone who finds themselves where I once was, facing the devastating betrayal of those who should protect them, I want you to know that your story doesn't have to end in defeat. Truth may be buried for a time, but it cannot be destroyed. Love may be wounded, but when it's genuine, it has the power to heal and renew. And courage, once found, becomes a flame that no amount of cruelty can extinguish. I am Linda Morrison, and I am free.